All right, in this first lesson, I want to share three mistakes that parents make without even knowing it. Plus, I'm going to throw in a bonus mistake that I think is worth considering. But I want to begin with a confession. When I first started working in Christian education, it's more than 30 years ago now, I made all three of the mistakes that I'm about to describe to you. And it wasn't because I was a bad parent or a careless educator. I made these mistakes because I hadn't yet been taught to think differently. I hadn't discovered, at least in any meaningful way, the older Christian intellectual tradition. See, I didn't even have the furniture, I think, that I needed to cultivate a robust life of the mind. And so, as a result, I did what many sincere Christian parents and educators do. I tried to build a better version of the same thing that I had inherited. So, we had better standards, we expected better behavior, we purchased better textbooks, we added Bible classes and chapel services. But if we were to change the metaphor, the differences that we made were more in the wallpaper than in the foundation. And so I suspect if you're honest with yourself, you'll probably recognize at least one of these mistakes in your own home. All right, so let's get down to it. Mistake number one, confusing information with formation. Here's the assumption many of us absorb from our own schooling without ever examining it. Education is primarily about filling the mind with content, facts, skills, knowledge, assignments, test scores, college readiness, career preparation. So the more a child knows, the better educated he is, right? But the classical Christian tradition would say this gets things almost precisely backwards. Education is not the accumulation of information. It's the passing down of wisdom and knowledge from one generation to the next. It's really where every culture tells the truth about what it believes and what it loves. And I think that matters that we understand that because education's never neutral. It's always forming loves. It's always shaping attention. It's always cultivating some vision of what a human being is for. Now, the ancients had a name for this. They called it paideia, the rearing of a young person in the proper view of the world. And so some synonyms would be upbringing or training or instruction, child rearing. But it's not in the sense of data transfer. It's in the formation of the whole person, their intellect, their will, their imagination, their affections and appetites, and their desires. Classical Christian education seeks to educate the whole person, human qua human. So it's not finally about training workers for an industrialized society. It's the education that makes for a full and free human being. And so the child who has, say, memorized 1,000 facts, but hasn't learned to love what's good or recognize what's true or isn't moved by what's beautiful, they've been trained and perhaps even efficiently trained, but that child's not yet been educated. The practical consequence of this mistake is that we measure our children's education almost entirely by what they can produce. Do they produce good grades or scores? Are they getting their assignments completed? Can they recall facts? Have they earned enough credits? But those aren't the deepest measures. The better question is not simply, what did my child learn today? The better question is, who is my child becoming? All right, and that leads us to mistake number two, outsourcing formation entirely to the school. Now, this mistake is subtle because it actually feels responsible. You've chosen a good school. Maybe it's an online Christian school or classical Christian school. Maybe it's a rigorous homeschool curriculum. So you trust the teachers, you care about the books, and you're involved enough to know that your child's receiving something better than what's being offered in the mainstream, right? And so without intending to, you begin to assume that the formation happening during school hours is sufficient. But see, formation is never outsourced. It's either intentional or it's accidental. Where the school can cultivate and the teacher can guide, the curriculum can even order the mind toward truth, but it's the home that remains the first and most powerful culture that your child inhabits. It's the books on your shelf. It's the conversations at your dinner table, the jokes you laugh at, the stories you tell. It's the things you admire and the things you dismiss. And it's the way you spend all of your leisure time. Every bit of that teaches. You have to think of your home as a liturgy, whether you have it written down or not. And classical Christian education can give a child the tools of freedom. It can prepare their soul for virtue and introduce the child to the liberal arts and the great conversation. It can even teach him that humane learning is ultimately a discipline of attention toward that which is worthy. But the home either strengthens that discipline or it dissolves it. And so if the school teaches attention, but the home practices distraction, then guess what the child's going to learn? You got it, distraction. And if the school teaches reverence, but the home practices cynicism, well, then the child's going to learn cynicism. And say the school teaches that wisdom's more precious than utility, but the home only speaks as if education's about college or job training or income or resume building, then the child's going to learn what the home teaches. It's going to believe what they learn in the home. So it doesn't mean that parents have to become professional educators. That's not what I'm saying at all. But it does mean that they have to recover confidence in their own vocation. The school can assist you, but it can never, ever replace you. And so this brings us to mistake number 3, assuming that the tradition is for the children and not for you. Now, this may be the most common mistake among parents who have chosen classical education for their children but didn't receive it themselves. Because, you see, you believe in it, you've seen what it does, you can see your own children flourishing in ways that you didn't flourish, right? They're reading all the books you never read, they're learning Latin that you never learned, they're discussing Homer and St. Augustine and maybe Shakespeare and Milton, some C.S. Lewis, and all the while you're just trying to remember what you even read in high school. Somewhere in the background, I think you probably feel this gap. At least a lot of parents tell me they do. And so the gap between what they're receiving and what you were given is real. The gap between the education that you now admire and the education that you never had, you feel it. And so here's what I want to say to you directly. The great conversation is not age restricted. Plato didn't write the Republic for 12-year-olds. St. Augustine didn't write the Confessions for people who had grown up in classical schools. And C.S. Lewis, he didn't write the Abolition of Man just for professional philosophers. The tradition is for any person at any stage of life who's willing to sit down with a serious book and give it the attention it deserves. In fact, I would argue that there's even a particular gift that comes to the adult who encounters these texts with all their accumulated experience, their life that's already been lived. Because you're going to bring questions that a child could never think to bring. You're going to bring sorrows that a child hasn't carried yet. Loves and losses and regrets, hopes and longings that are going to make the old book speak with startling intimacy. Augustine's restless heart is not just a metaphor to a 40-year-old who's spent 20 years building a life that doesn't quite satisfy. It's actually a diagnosis. And this is one of the great recoveries of classical Christian education for parents. You're not just simply choosing an education for your children. You are being invited into the life of the mind yourself. So you don't have to return to school so that you can, to begin this. You don't have to go back and get a degree. You just need a book and a chair, a pencil, maybe a little courage and a few friends that you can read with in community. And you too can gain this education that you want to give your children. All right, so let me throw in a bonus mistake. All right, failing to entrust the teachers who are truly your allies. So this is one of the mistakes that I also think that's worth naming, and especially it's for our present moment, because there are some parents who choose teachers who share their deepest convictions, at least broadly speaking, but they fail to entrust them. They scrutinize every assignment. They suspect every difference. They talk down the teacher at the dinner table. They assume that if a teacher doesn't agree with the family on every detail, then that teacher must not be safe, or maybe they're not faithful or trustworthy. Now, of course, parents have to be discerning, and teachers aren't substitute for parents. We just talked about that. And no parent should blindly entrust a child to their teacher who's going to be hostile to the family's faith or to their values or vision of a good life. But I want to submit that there's a difference between discernment and suspicion. There's even a difference between alignment and total agreement. A teacher may not share every preference, every emphasis, or every denominational nuance, not even every household practice, but they can still be a true ally. A good teacher often serves the family, actually, by bringing gifts to the family that they don't possess in the same measure. Maybe it's the mastery of a particular subject or some pedagogical wisdom. Maybe it's patience born of practice and a love for students that are ordered, toward their intellectual and moral good. A good teacher knows the telos of education, and education's not job training, as we've said. It's not just civic formation, and it's not helping students to become whatever they want to be. The purpose of educating children is to prepare them to be virtuous and wise, to be free men and women in the kingdom of God. And so when a teacher is genuinely laboring toward that end, parents should be careful not to undermine that labor, with careless words and bad attitudes. Children learn how to regard authority by watching how their parents speak of those to whom they have delegated a portion of that authority. And so if a parent constantly corrects, belittles, mocks, suspects, or even second guesses the teacher, especially in front of the child may learn more than the parent intended. He may learn that teachers are service providers and not authorities. The child may learn that education's just a consumer transaction and not a shared vocation. He may learn that every disagreement is actually a betrayal. And that's not classical, and it's certainly not Christian. So the better way is covenantal, not to be a consumer. Parents and teachers are not competitors. They're not rival claimants over the child's mind and soul. At best, they're allies in the same work. They're helping the child apprehend wisdom, appropriate noble judgment, and they're helping him become the kind of person that's capable of bringing ordered judgment to the disorders of the age. So, by all means, choose teachers carefully. Choose teachers whose loves are rightly ordered. Choose teachers who understand that humane learning is a discipline of attention toward that which is worthy. Choose teachers who know that education's ordered toward wisdom and virtue. But once you've chosen them, trust them. Speak well of them. Of course, ask honest questions, but assume goodwill where goodwill has been demonstrated. And when a disagreement comes, and I promise you it surely will come, treat it as an occasion for a conversation, not for contempt. All right? So there they are. There's the 3 mistakes that parents make without even knowing it, plus the bonus mistake that is often more common, I think, than we care to admit. Okay, number 1, we confuse information with formation. Number 2, we outsource formation entirely to the school. Number 3, we assume that tradition is for our children, but not for us. And then sometimes, having chosen the teachers who are truly our allies, we fail to really entrust them with the work that we ask them to do. Okay. Now, the good news is that none of these mistakes is fatal. They're all correctable. And the correction begins with a simple shift. We shift from asking not only, what is your child learning, and we shift to asking, who is your child? And who are you becoming? That's the question I think that's worth sitting with. And because in a confused and fragmented world, recovering such an education for our children is now more essential than ever. Thank you very much.